Coming up a field. Sorry about that. Listen, I got a question here. You hope to get a haircut at all?
No.
No, thanks.
I had one yesterday.
That's no lie.
The jet engines were as loud as the screams at the airport. This is how we first met the Beatles in America. 1964, arriving in New York City.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
And this is how people in Oregon County, Missouri got to see the Beatles as they began their first concert tour. Their appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show is among the most watched TV shows ever.
Long-haired rock and roll stars that probably as young girls we shouldn't have been that excited about.
That tour was February 1964, and it went so well, the Beatles returned in 6 months. The summer of '64, the Beatles were on their second concert tour of America, and the man who owned the plane they had chartered for their tour, Reed Pigman of Fort Worth, Texas, just happened to own a ranch near Alton, Missouri. The Beatles wanted to get away from the frenzy of the tour, so they planned a secret trip to the Ozarks. And little could anyone here imagine, but this house, miles from the town of Alton, Missouri, would soon become an epicenter of Beatlemania. Back then, it was Reed Pigman's house in the middle of his 12,000-acre cattle ranch. The Fab Four and their entourage arrived late at night. No one could possibly know the world's most popular rock band was here, or so they thought.
When I look back, I think how strange that must have been to them to just be dropped off in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere.
By morning, everything had changed at Pigman Ranch.
Paul just opened the door of our home and walked in.
Mary Deathrow lived there.
It was a shock.
Since the ranch is so far from town, back then all the workers and their families lived in smaller houses next to the big house. Before long, the Beatles started to enjoy the countryside, and Paul McCartney wanted to go fishing.
And he said, "Hi, my name is Paul. I'm from Walnut Ridge, Arkansas." So he was there to borrow a reel and rod from us.
And we were all in that living room, and Paul comes in. So we're all just standing there, you know, looking at Paul.
The shock of him being in the house, I couldn't think straight. I just started going through the house looking. He started opening closet doors, followed me around, looking everywhere.
And it was very nice. He was very nice.
Looking for a fishing pole.
Yes, in closets, mind you. And then finally it dawned on me, well, stupid, we keep them on the back porch. And so he and I went to the back porch and he got a reel and rod.
As Paul went fishing, the other Beatles started to enjoy their break from the concert tour. Ringo played with Cowboy cap pistols.
My first time to see any of them was when Ringo came out the door, down the steps. He had his pistols in his hand.
And Ringo had a set of guns on him that Elvis was supposed to have gave him.
Cap pistols, I think they were, they said, but he had these holsters on, these pistols.
Ringo had on this huge bell-bottom red shirt. His sleeves were like this, and he was walking down like a cowboy. He had a holster on with guns. I don't know if they're real or not.
I remember Ringo because he was the flashy guy with the red blousey shirt, and I wanted to look like him. He talked so differently than anybody I'd ever heard. You know, I was only 6.
People who lived on the ranch were supposed to keep the Beatles' visit secret, but word leaked out anyway. Before long, teenagers gathered at the ranch house gate. Boys were sent to guard the gate and keep Beatle fans out.
I was 15 at the time.
Running security for the Beatles.
We had no idea of the impact of the whole situation.
I was supposed to be a guard. I stood down at the gate most of the time.
A group of young teenage girls that were all stationed over here on the rock entrance there beside the iron gates, and they were very emotional. They were very distraught because they couldn't get in.
Back then, the ranch house was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence. Bulls grazed in the pasture. As the sun set on that first day of the Beatles' visit, more and more teenagers showed up, trying to get in. Some climbed over the fence.
What I remember about it most is the kids getting out in the field with the mean bulls. So we didn't have to chase them off as bulls chased them off.
The gate being locked, it's dark, there's spotlights in the field, there's kids on the fence line, and then they would spotlight the bulls to show the kids that there was bulls in that field, do not come across.
We got down that road a little ways, and somebody came up with the idea, well, maybe we can come and sneak up here.
Larry Cockman and a carload of teens saw the guards at the gate, so they drove out of sight past the gate, parked, and hiked.
We got out of the car, and the guys snuck up through the field. And we came up across here and came up to the house and made it, not thinking about what we were going through or whether the bulls were out here or what. We didn't care at the time, apparently. We never could really feel like that we really saw the Beatles.
I come home from work one evening and she said, let's go down and see the Beatles. And I said, who are they? We first come out here at the gate and they had the guards out there and they wouldn't let anybody in. Judy wanted to see them real bad, so I said, I can go home and get the boat.
Well, he just would do what I asked him to do.
Don and Judy Woods sneaked in by water on the 11-Point River.
This time he volunteered, so I went with him.
They hiked up a hill behind the house. It was about 10 o'clock that night. The Beatles were playing cards at the kitchen table.
Peeked in the windows at them.
They were playing cards. We didn't want to create a problem, so we just looked at them and left.
Saw some long hair on a man, first long hair I'd ever seen.
They had hair I had never seen before.
It was out of style at that time for the hills, I guarantee you.
And they all had long hair, what we thought was long.
You know, looking back now, their hair wasn't that long, but at the time it seemed like it was long. And
it was like, you know, times of crew cuts. But they had this long hair. I couldn't believe it, they were guys.
Don't ask me about their hairdo.
Before long, the people who worked on the ranch kind of got comfortable having the Beatles around.
I will say that Ringo and Paul, they were very outgoing. And John and George was more reserved.
The official tour photographer, Kurt Gunther, took photos of the Beatles relaxing in the Ozarks.
Remember watching them ride their horses.
And sure enough, there was Paul McCartney sitting on a horse. Oh, we hurried to get our cameras out, and the only thing I remember him saying to me personally was, in his little British accent, he says, "Oh no, not so early in the morning." And anyway, we took our pictures.
From all indications, I think that was probably the first horseback ride they had had.
In the meantime, as word spread that the Beatles were here, adults got worried the ranch might be overrun with fans.
There were rumors of busloads of people coming from St. Louis and Kansas City.
They called for help. A state trooper and a part-time deputy arrived in a car like this. They drove up to the ranch house and were surrounded by Beatles.
They saw the patrol car and they were enthused about that, wanted to know how the two-way radio worked and the sirens. And
Carl Johnson was a part-time deputy and a disc jockey in West Plains. He'd been playing the Beatles on the radio. All of a sudden, he was meeting the Beatles.
Asked me if I did anything else, and I said radio. And they said, oh, radio, you play our music? And I told them about that, and they were excited about that too. So they also were the most excited, I think, about the patrol car. They liked that. They wanted to take a ride, and it was a little touchy to do that, you know.
Some of the teenagers living on the ranch got up enough nerve to ask the Beatles to autograph albums. One asked them to autograph her clarinet case. At the gate, a photographer took her picture.
Had my picture in the Springfield paper. I had never been to Springfield before and couldn't imagine getting to my picture in that Sunday paper. It was life-changing. People knew me or wanted to meet me or wanted to find me, high school kids that would otherwise have never had any interest in knowing who I was.
But for the most part, few asked for autographs.
If I'd have been smart at the time, while all four of them were sitting at the table while I was here playing cards, I would have gotten autographs. But they weren't here to give autographs. They were here to relax, enjoy, and I let them have their privacy.
Any regrets?
Many regrets. I could have had a lot of things.
I just followed him around, looked at him. I probably was scared to death to speak to him, you know. But
Dozens, even hundreds of teenagers in Oregon County did not get to see the Beatles at all.
I did not get to see them at that point, and I was an avid Beatle fan.
She was probably the top 10 Beatle fan in the nation at that time. Of course, that's arguable, but she probably was.
And I mean, I had every fan magazine that at the time, and I would cut out all their pictures. I completely papered my whole walls of my room twice.
But after a few days off, the Beatles had to get back to work. This Suburban carried them to the airport.
There was lots of people there, lots of girls screaming and yelling. And then we saw a car pull out of the Pigman Ranch gate, and we assumed the Beatles were in it. We couldn't actually see inside the car, but a lot of girls were screaming and bending down and kissing the road that they drove over.
At the airport in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, the Beatles took off in their chartered airplane, leaving behind many people on Pigman Ranch and Oregon County, Missouri, with memories they cherish to this day, 50 years later.
It's just one of those experiences, like a lot of other people have said. Most of us, if you talk about the Beatles, when the Beatles visited Pigman Ranch, you remember where you were, what you were doing, and just how it all fell into place.
Sometimes it almost feels like a dream. When I look back on it and go to putting things together, you know, actually, it took a while for it to even dawn on me that the Beatles had actually been here, that I had actually seen them, you know.
So many people do not know that story. And there are so many hidden pictures that we all have that people's never seen.
And I think it keeps growing, you know.
Occasionally, especially with my students, I will mention that and they'll kind of say, who was the Beatles, you know, or was that the same Paul McCartney that was with Wings, or, you know.
What do you remember about the Beatles?
That they're awesome. And I was told that Paul McCartney held me when I was 2 years old.
Really?
Yes. Yes. So that's been my claim to fame, and I love it.
Today, you know, being 50 years ago, it's hard to imagine that something like that actually took place here at this place. It actually happened, and we were involved. We were in it. Kind of neat deal. So neat.